behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where every word is measured and every gesture calculated, there exists a world of unspoken tensions that the public never sees. What happens when the cameras stop rolling and the carefully crafted royal smiles fade away? One retired royal protection officer, speaking on condition of anonymity after 25 years of service, has finally broken his silence about an incident that shook the very foundations of the modern monarchy. It was a moment that revealed the true character of Princess Anne, the fierce loyalty that binds the royal women, and the dangerous undercurrents that threaten to tear the family apart from within. This isn't just another palace rumor or tabloid speculation. This is the first-hand account of a man who stood just feet away when Princess Anne, the Queen's only daughter, and arguably the most formidable member of the royal family, took a stand that would change everything. A stand that protected Catherine, Princess of Wales, from an attack so personal and vicious that it came not from the press or the public, but from within the royal family itself. The incident involved Tom Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla's son from her first marriage, whose sense of entitlement and disregard for royal protocol had been growing bolder by the day. But on this particular afternoon, he crossed a line that even his stepfather's position as king could not protect him from. He underestimated the one person in the royal family who has never backed down from a fight, Princess Anne. What unfolded next was a masterclass in royal authority, family loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds that form between women who understand the unique pressures of life under the crown. It was a moment that would be whispered about in palace corridors for years to come, a turning point that redefined relationships and power dynamics within the House of Windsor. This is that story, told through the eyes of the man whose job it was to protect the royal family even when the greatest threat came from within their own ranks. Detective Chief Inspector Malcolm Richardson had been protecting the royal family for 2.5 decades. He had seen 3 monarchs, countless state visits, family celebrations, and personal tragedies. He thought he had witnessed every possible scenario that could unfold within the walls of the various royal residences. But nothing had prepared him for what he would witness on that crisp October afternoon at Windsor Castle. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves from the castle grounds as Malcolm took his position in the green drawing room. It was meant to be a routine family gathering, one of those informal meetings that the palace never officially acknowledges but which happen regularly to maintain family unity and discuss ongoing royal duties. The king had requested the presence of several senior family members to discuss the upcoming Christmas schedule and various charitable commitments that needed to be coordinated. Malcolm had arrived early, as was his custom, to survey the room and ensure all security protocols were in place. The green drawing room, with its rich emerald walls and portraits of long-dead royals staring down from gilded frames, had hosted countless family discussions over the centuries. Today, it would witness something far more dramatic than a simple scheduling meeting. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was the first to arrive. Malcolm had always admired her grace under pressure, the way she had adapted to royal life while maintaining her own identity. She wore a navy blue dress that complemented her sapphire engagement ring, her hair styled in soft waves that caught the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. There was something different about her today, though. Malcolm noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she acknowledged his presence with a polite nod. Prince William arrived shortly after, his arm briefly touching his wife's back in a gesture of support that Malcolm didn't miss. The prince's jaw was set in a way that suggested he was already anticipating conflict. The couple exchanged quiet words near the ornate fireplace, their voices too low for Malcolm to hear, but their body language spoke volumes. Princess Anne entered next, her presence immediately commanding the room's attention, even though she made no dramatic entrance. At 73, the Princess Royal remained one of the most formidable members of the royal family. Her silver hair was pulled back in its characteristic style, and she wore a practical tweed suit that somehow managed to look both appropriate for country life and royal duties. Malcolm had worked with Princess Anne numerous times over the years and had learned to recognize the signs that indicated her mood. The slight narrowing of her eyes and the way she positioned herself near Catherine suggested she was already aware that trouble might be brewing. King Charles arrived fashionably late, as was his habit since ascending the throne. The weight of the crown had aged him visibly in the year since his coronation, adding new lines around his eyes and a more serious set to his mouth. He greeted his family with the formal affection that characterized most royal interactions, kissing his daughter on both cheeks and shaking hands with his son. But it was Queen Camilla's entrance that shifted the entire atmosphere of the room. She swept in wearing an elegant cream-colored coat dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, every inch the confident queen consort. Behind her, as if he were part of her official retinue, came Tom Parker Bowles. Malcolm had encountered Tom on several previous occasions, and each interaction had left him with the same impression. Here was a man who believed his mother's marriage to the king entitled him to far more respect and privilege than he actually deserved. Tom was in his late 40s, with the soft look of someone who had never truly had to work for anything important in his life. His food writing career had been successful enough, but everyone knew that his mother's connections had opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. Today, Tom's demeanor was particularly insufferable. He entered the room as if he belonged there, as if he had every right to be present at a family discussion about royal duties. Malcolm noticed how Catherine's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly when she saw him, and how Prince William's expression darkened. Even King Charles seemed momentarily surprised by his stepson's presence, though he quickly composed himself. The first half hour of the meeting proceeded normally enough. They discussed the Christmas service at Sandringham, the various charitable patronages that needed attention before the end of the year, and the coordination of public appearances. Malcolm stood at his assigned position near the door, professionally invisible but acutely aware of every word and gesture. It was when the conversation turned to the Wales family's upcoming international tour that things began to deteriorate. Catherine was explaining their planned visit to several Commonwealth nations when Tom made his first inappropriate comment. "I suppose they'll need extra security for that tour," he said with a smirk that Malcolm found particularly distasteful. "Catherine does seem to attract quite a bit of negative attention these days." The room fell silent. Even Malcolm, trained to remain emotionally detached during his duties, felt his jaw clench. Catherine's face remained perfectly composed, but Malcolm could see the hurt flash briefly in her eyes before she regained her royal composure. Prince William's reaction was more visible. His face flushed slightly, and his hands clenched into fists before he forced himself to relax them. "Catherine handles her royal duties with exceptional grace," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "The tour will be a tremendous success, as her previous international visits have been." Tom laughed, a sound that grated against the formal atmosphere of the room. Of course. I'm sure she'll do wonderfully. She's certainly gotten much better at playing the part over the years." The phrase, "playing the part," hung in the air like a challenge. Malcolm watched as Princess Anne's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Her back straightened and her eyes fixed on Tom with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. Malcolm had seen that look before, usually directed at photographers who had gotten too close to family members or journalists who had overstepped appropriate boundaries. Queen Camilla attempted to smooth over the moment. "Tom, perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand," she said, but her tone was mild, lacking any real rebuke. It was clear that she either couldn't or wouldn't control her son's behavior. The king, caught between his wife's family and his own, chose diplomacy. "Yes, let's return to the schedule," he said. "Catherine, you were saying about the educational initiatives you plan to highlight?" But Tom wasn't finished. As Catherine began to speak about the schools and universities they planned to visit, he continued to make small, cutting remarks. Comments about outsiders adapting to royal life, suggestions that certain protocols might be challenging for someone without proper preparation, and observations about learning curves that everyone understood were specifically aimed at Catherine. Malcolm had been trained to observe and assess threats to the royal family, and he was witnessing something he had never seen before: a sustained, deliberate attack on a senior royal family member from within the family itself. What made it worse was the precision of Tom's approach. Each comment was just subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but collectively, they formed a pattern of disrespect and barely concealed hostility. Prince William's struggle to maintain his composure was becoming more obvious with each passing minute. Malcolm could see the prince's internal battle between his desire to defend his wife and his understanding of royal protocol. An outburst would create exactly the kind of family drama that the monarchy worked so hard to avoid. Catherine, for her part, handled each slight with remarkable dignity. She acknowledged Tom's comments with polite smiles and continued with her presentations as if nothing untoward was happening. But Malcolm, trained to read body language and micro-expressions, could see the cumulative effect of the attacks. Her breathing had become slightly more shallow, and she was gripping her hands together more tightly with each exchange. It was when Tom made a comment about some people needing more guidance than others when it comes to representing the crown that Malcolm noticed Princess Anne had had enough. The Princess Royal's posture changed subtly, her weight shifting forward slightly, as if preparing to spring into action. Her eyes never left Tom's face, and Malcolm realized he was about to witness something unprecedented. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Even King Charles seemed to sense that something was about to happen, his eyes moving nervously between his stepson and his sister. Queen Camilla appeared oblivious to the danger her son was courting, or perhaps she simply chose not to see it. Malcolm had positioned himself where he could see everyone's faces, and what he observed in Princess Anne's expression told him that Tom Parker Bowles had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The Princess Royal was known for her directness, her intolerance for nonsense, and her fierce protection of family members who couldn't defend themselves in certain situations. Tom had just crossed every one of those lines. The afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed to highlight the battle lines that had been drawn in the elegant drawing room. On one side stood Catherine and William, isolated and under attack. On the other side was Tom, emboldened by his mother's presence and his stepfather's reluctance to intervene. And in the middle was Princess Anne, the family's enforcer, preparing to restore balance to a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. Malcolm realized he was about to witness royal history in the making. What happened next would either restore order to the family hierarchy or create a rift that might never fully heal. Either way, he would have a front-row seat to one of the most dramatic confrontations in modern royal history. The room fell into an expectant silence as Princess Anne slowly rose from her chair. Everyone seemed to sense that the real drama was about to begin. When Princess Anne stood up, the atmosphere in the green drawing room changed completely. Malcolm had been present during many tense royal moments over his career, but he had never experienced anything quite like the electric charge that seemed to fill the air as the Princess Royal rose to her full height. At 73, she remained an imposing figure, and when she focused her attention on someone who had earned her displeasure, the effect was formidable. Tom Parker Bowles, who had been leaning back in his chair with the casual arrogance that had characterized his behavior throughout the meeting, suddenly seemed to realize that he might have miscalculated. His smirk faded as Princess Anne's steely gaze locked onto his face. The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of the ornate clock on the mantelpiece. "Tom," Princess Anne said, her voice carrying the crisp authority that had commanded respect throughout her decades of royal service. "I believe you have something you'd like to say to Catherine. Something that resembles an apology, perhaps." The directness of her approach caught everyone off guard, including Malcolm. He had expected something more subtle, perhaps a diplomatic suggestion that they move on to other topics. Instead, Princess Anne had chosen to confront the situation head-on, forcing Tom into a position where he could no longer hide behind innuendo and veiled insults. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confidence evaporating under the Princess Royal's unwavering stare. "I'm not sure what you mean, Aunt Anne," he said, attempting to maintain his casual tone but failing to keep the nervousness out of his voice. "I was simply making conversation." "Conversation?" Princess Anne repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "Is that what we're calling it? How fascinating." She took a step closer to where Tom was sitting, her posture radiating the kind of controlled anger that Malcolm recognized from his years of military service. "In my experience, conversation implies a degree of mutual respect and basic civility. What I've observed for the past 30 minutes has been neither conversational nor civil." Malcolm watched as Queen Camilla opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to defend her son, but something in Princess Anne's expression made her think better of it. King Charles appeared frozen, caught between his loyalty to his wife's family and his respect for his sister's judgment. Prince William remained tense, ready to defend his wife if necessary, while Catherine sat with remarkable composure despite being the target of the attack. Tom attempted to recover his earlier bravado. "I think you might be overreacting," he said with a forced laugh. "We're all family here, aren't we? Surely we can speak freely among ourselves." The mention of family was clearly the wrong approach. Princess Anne's eyes narrowed, and Malcolm could see her hands clench slightly at her sides. "Family," she said, her voice dropping to a more dangerous register. "Yes, let's discuss family. Let's discuss what it means to be part of this family, to carry the responsibilities that come with our positions, and to show appropriate respect for those who have earned their place through dedication and service." She began to pace slowly, her movements controlled and precise. Malcolm realized she was building to something, preparing to deliver a response that had been forming in her mind throughout Tom's sustained attack on Catherine. "You see, Tom, being part of this family isn't simply a matter of marriage connections or bloodlines. It's about understanding the weight of our responsibilities, the dignity of our positions, and the respect we owe to those who serve alongside us." Tom's face was growing redder by the moment. Whether from embarrassment or anger, Malcolm couldn't tell. "I understand my position perfectly well," he said defensively. "Do you?" Princess Anne stopped pacing and fixed him with a stare that could have frozen fire. "Because from where I'm standing, your understanding appears to be severely limited. You seem to believe that your mother's marriage to my brother gives you the right to insult and belittle one of the hardest-working members of this family. You appear to think that Catherine's dedication to her duties, her grace under pressure, and her genuine care for the people she serves are somehow subjects for your amusement." The Royal Protection Officer had witnessed many difficult family moments during his career, but he had never seen Princess Anne quite like this. Her anger was controlled but devastating, each word chosen for maximum impact. She continued her verbal dismantling of Tom's behavior with surgical precision. "Catherine has spent over a decade proving herself worthy of her position," Princess Anne continued. "She has embraced every aspect of royal life, from the most glamorous state occasions to the most challenging public appearances. She has raised 3 children while maintaining an exhausting schedule of public duties. She has represented this country with distinction on the international stage, and has used her platform to advocate for causes that genuinely matter to people's lives." Malcolm noticed that Catherine's eyes had filled with tears, though she maintained her composed expression. Prince William reached over and briefly squeezed her hand, his own emotional response to his aunt's defense clearly visible. "But perhaps," Princess Anne said, her voice growing even more pointed, "you think her accomplishments are somehow less valuable because she wasn't born into this life? Perhaps you believe that only those of us who inherited our positions have the right to be here?" And how interesting that perspective would be, coming from someone whose own connection to this family is precisely as you described it through marriage. The comparison was devastating in its accuracy. Tom had built his sense of entitlement on his mother's marriage to the king, yet he was criticizing Catherine for achieving her position through her own marriage to a prince. The hypocrisy of his position was now laid bare for everyone in the room to see. Queen Camilla finally found her voice. "Anne, I think perhaps we're making too much of this." Tom didn't mean anything serious by his comments. Princess Anne turned her attention briefly to her sister-in-law, and Malcolm saw a flash of something that might have been disappointment cross her face. "Camilla, with all due respect, intent matters far less than impact. And the impact of your son's behavior today has been to make Catherine feel unwelcome and disrespected in her own family. That is unacceptable, regardless of what he meant." The king finally stirred himself to speak. "Anne, perhaps we could all take a step back and—" "No, Charles," his sister interrupted, something that Malcolm had rarely witnessed in all his years of service. "This is exactly the kind of situation where we need to step forward, not back. This family has a long history of avoiding difficult conversations, of letting problems fester in the name of keeping peace. But sometimes peace comes at too high a price." She turned back to Tom, who was now looking distinctly uncomfortable under the sustained attention. "You want to be part of this family? Then start acting like it. That means showing respect for everyone at this table, regardless of how they came to be here. That means recognizing that Catherine has earned her place through years of dedicated service. And that means keeping your petty jealousies and insecurities to yourself instead of using them as weapons against someone who has never done anything to deserve your hostility. The word jealousies hit its mark. Malcolm saw Tom flinch as if he had been physically struck. Princess Anne had identified the real source of his behavior, and her diagnosis was apparently accurate. "I'm not jealous of anyone," Tom protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Aren't you?" Princess Anne asked with raised eyebrows. "Because from my perspective, it appears that you resent Catherine's success, her popularity, and her seamless integration into royal life. Perhaps it bothers you that she has achieved everything you might have hoped for yourself if you had been willing to put in the effort required." Malcolm had to admire the Princess Royal's tactical approach. She had systematically dismantled Tom's position, exposed his motivations, and defended Catherine without resorting to personal attacks or losing her own dignity. It was a masterclass in royal authority exercised with precision and purpose. But Tom wasn't finished fighting back. Perhaps pushed beyond his limits by the accuracy of Princess Anne's observations, he made the mistake of escalating the confrontation. "This is rich coming from someone whose own children have hardly been models of royal behavior," he said, his voice rising with anger and desperation. The moment those words left his mouth, Malcolm knew that Tom Parker Bowles had just crossed a line from which there would be no return. The reference to Princess Anne's children, Peter and Zara, who had largely remained outside royal duties but had never caused any significant scandals, was not only inappropriate but showed a complete misunderstanding of royal family dynamics. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Malcolm watched as Princess Anne's expression shifted from controlled anger to something far more dangerous. She had been defending Catherine against unfair attacks, but now Tom had made it personal by bringing her own children into the argument. When Princess Anne spoke again, her voice was quiet, but carried an authority that made Malcolm's spine straighten involuntarily. "Tom," she said, "you have just made your second serious mistake today. Your first was attacking Catherine. Your second was mentioning my children in an attempt to deflect from your own inappropriate behavior." She walked closer to him, and Malcolm could see that Tom was beginning to realize the magnitude of his error. "My children have chosen to live largely private lives, supporting the family when needed but pursuing their own careers and interests. They have conducted themselves with dignity and respect. They have never used their connections for personal gain or attacked other family members in family meetings. Perhaps you should consider following their example." The rebuke was delivered with such calm precision that it was more devastating than any shouted response could have been. Malcolm realized he was witnessing not just a family argument, but a lesson in how real authority operated. Princess Anne had maintained her composure while systematically destroying Tom's position and defending both Catherine and her own children. King Charles looked stricken by the escalation of the confrontation, while Queen Camilla appeared torn between defending her son and acknowledging the justice of Princess Anne's response. Prince William and Catherine remained silent, but Malcolm could see their gratitude for the Princess Royal's intervention. The confrontation had reached a critical moment. Tom had been thoroughly defeated in the verbal exchange, his motivations exposed, and his behavior condemned. But Malcolm sensed that Princess Anne wasn't finished. She had more to say, and whatever came next would determine not just the outcome of this particular meeting, but potentially the future dynamics of the entire family. The silence that followed Tom's ill-advised comment about Princess Anne's children stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Malcolm had been trained to read dangerous situations, and every instinct told him that the confrontation was about to reach its climax. Princess Anne stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on Tom with an intensity that made the royal protection officer grateful he wasn't the target of her attention. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a quiet authority that seemed to command not just attention, but absolute respect. "Tom, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say because I will only say it once." The Princess Royal moved to stand directly in front of him, close enough that he had to look up to meet her eyes. Malcolm noticed that everyone else in the room seemed to be holding their breath, including King Charles, who appeared both fascinated and horrified by his sister's commanding presence. You came into this room today believing that your mother's marriage to my brother gives you certain privileges, Princess Anne began, her words measured and deliberate. You believed you could insult Catherine with impunity, that you could question her worthiness to be here, that you could treat her as somehow less deserving of respect than the rest of us. You were wrong on every count. Tom opened his mouth to speak, but Princess Anne held up a hand that stopped him as effectively as a physical barrier. I'm not finished, she said, and the simple words carried such authority that Malcolm felt compelled to straighten his own posture in response. Catherine didn't ask to be part of this family, Princess Anne continued. She was a young woman who fell in love with my nephew, and she has spent the last 15 years of her life proving that she was worthy of that love and of the position it brought her. She has endured scrutiny that would break most people. She has faced criticism from the press, from the public, and apparently from members of her own family. Through it all, she has maintained her dignity, fulfilled her duties, and supported William in his role as future king. Malcolm watched as Catherine's composed facade finally cracked slightly, a single tear rolling down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away. Prince William's jaw was clenched so tightly that Malcolm worried he might break a tooth, but he remained silent, understanding that this was Princess Anne's moment to defend his wife in a way that his own royal protocols might prevent him from doing. But more than that, Princess Anne went on, Catherine has brought something to this family that we desperately needed. She has shown us what genuine warmth looks like, what authentic connection with people means. She has reminded us that our duties are not burdens to be endured, but opportunities to serve. She has raised 3 children who understand both their privilege and their responsibilities. She has done all of this while being scrutinized and judged by people who have achieved a fraction of what she has accomplished. The Princess Royal's defense of Catherine was comprehensive and devastating in its accuracy. Malcolm realized he was witnessing not just a family argument, but a redefinition of what it meant to belong to the House of Windsor. Princess Anne was establishing a new standard that valued service and dedication over birthright and connections. So when you sit in this room, Princess Anne continued, her voice rising slightly with passion, and suggest that Catherine somehow doesn't belong here, you reveal your own profound ignorance about what this family actually stands for. You show that you understand nothing about duty, nothing about service, and nothing about the qualities that make someone worthy of the positions we hold. Tom's face had gone from red to pale during Princess Anne's speech. Malcolm could see that the man was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his error, but it was far too late for a graceful retreat. Furthermore, Princess Anne said, and Malcolm realized she was building to her final point, your behavior today has shown me that you fundamentally misunderstand your own position in this family. You are not a working royal. You do not carry out official duties. You do not represent the crown in any capacity. You are the son of my brother's wife, nothing more and nothing less. That connection does not give you the right to attack those of us who do carry out official duties, and it certainly doesn't give you the right to insult Catherine. The distinction Princess Anne was drawing was crucial and had never been stated so clearly in Malcolm's presence. She was establishing the hierarchy not based on marriage connections or bloodlines, but on actual service to the crown and the people. By this standard, Catherine ranked far above Tom in the family structure. Queen Camilla finally found the courage to speak up for her son. Anne, I understand you're upset, but Tom is part of this family now. Surely we can find a way to— Camilla! Princess Anne interrupted, turning her attention to her sister-in-law with a gaze that was somehow both respectful and implacable. Tom is your son, and I understand your desire to protect him. But being part of this family means accepting certain standards of behavior. It means showing respect for those who serve alongside us. It means understanding that with privilege comes responsibility. She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. If Tom cannot meet those standards, if he cannot treat Catherine with the respect she has earned and deserves, then perhaps he needs to reconsider whether family gatherings like this are appropriate for him to attend. The suggestion hung in the air like a thunderclap. Malcolm had never heard a senior member of the royal family explicitly suggest that someone should be excluded from family functions, but Princess Anne had just done exactly that. The implication was clear. Tom could choose to behave appropriately, or find himself unwelcome at future gatherings. King Charles looked stricken by his sister's ultimatum. Malcolm could see the king struggling with competing loyalties, torn between supporting his wife's family and accepting his sister's judgment about appropriate behavior. The position was clearly agonizing for him, caught between different factions of his own family. Tom, meanwhile, seemed to realize that his position was untenable. He had been systematically dismantled by Princess Anne's arguments, his motivations exposed, his behavior condemned, and his future participation in family events called into question. Malcolm watched as the man's arrogance finally crumbled completely. "I think," Tom said quietly, his earlier bravado completely gone, "that perhaps I should go." "That," Princess Anne replied, "is the first sensible thing you've said all afternoon." But she wasn't finished with him yet. As Tom began to rise from his chair, Princess Anne held up her hand again. "Before you leave," she said, "there's one more thing you need to do." Tom stopped halfway out of his chair, looking both confused and apprehensive. Malcolm could see that everyone in the room was wondering what Princess Anne's final requirement would be. "You owe Catherine an apology," Princess Anne said simply. "A real one. Not an excuse or a justification, but an acknowledgement that your behavior today was inappropriate and hurtful." The request put Tom in an impossible position. Malcolm could see the man's internal struggle as he realized that apologizing would be an admission of guilt, but refusing would confirm everything Princess Anne had said about his character and his unfitness for family gatherings. Catherine, who had remained largely silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. "That's not necessary," she said quietly. "I don't need an apology that isn't genuine." Her response was perfectly calculated. By declining to demand an apology, Catherine demonstrated both her grace and her strength. She was showing that she was above Tom's petty attacks while simultaneously highlighting his failure to offer a genuine expression of regret. Princess Anne smiled at Catherine, the first warm expression Malcolm had seen from her since the confrontation began. "That," she said, "is exactly why you belong in this family, and why your example should be followed by everyone in this room." Tom stood fully now, his face a mixture of embarrassment and resentment. Malcolm could see that the man was struggling with the complete destruction of his position and his authority in the family hierarchy. Everything he had believed about his own importance had been systematically dismantled. "I'll see myself out," Tom said stiffly, attempting to maintain some shred of dignity in his retreat. "Yes," Princess Anne replied calmly, "you will." As Tom walked toward the door, passing close to Malcolm's position, the Royal Protection Officer could see the defeated slump of his shoulders and the angry set of his mouth. This was a man who had learned a hard lesson about family dynamics and personal accountability, though Malcolm suspected the lesson might not stick. After Tom left, the room remained silent for several long moments. Malcolm could feel the tension slowly beginning to drain from the atmosphere, but he knew that the confrontation had changed something fundamental about the family's dynamics. Princess Anne returned to her chair, her posture relaxing slightly now that the immediate threat had been addressed. King Charles looked exhausted by the entire episode, while Queen Camilla appeared torn between anger at her son's humiliation and acknowledgement that his behavior had indeed been inappropriate. Prince William was the first to speak. "Thank you, Aunt Anne," he said simply, but the emotion in his voice made the simple words deeply meaningful. Catherine reached over and briefly touched Princess Anne's hand. "That was incredibly kind of you," she said quietly. Princess Anne's response was characteristically direct. "It wasn't kind," she said. "It was necessary. This family works because we support each other, not because we tear each other down." Malcolm realized he had just witnessed something unprecedented in his years of royal service. Princess Anne had not just defended Catherine, she had redefined the family's standards and established new boundaries for acceptable behavior. The confrontation had been uncomfortable but ultimately necessary, and its effects would likely be felt for years to come. The afternoon's events had revealed the true character of everyone involved, and Malcolm knew that this moment would be discussed in royal circles for years to come, as the day Princess Anne drew the line and reminded everyone what it truly meant to be part of the House of Windsor. In the immediate aftermath of Tom Parker Bowles's departure from the Green Drawing Room, Malcolm Richardson observed a family grappling with the consequences of a confrontation that had laid bare years of simmering tensions and unspoken resentments. The Royal Protection Officer had witnessed many difficult moments during his career, but he had never seen such a complete dismantling of someone's position within the family hierarchy, nor such a clear establishment of new boundaries and expectations. The silence that followed Tom's exit was heavy with unspoken thoughts and suppressed emotions. King Charles sat with his head in his hands, clearly overwhelmed by the collision between his loyalty to his wife's family and his respect for his sister's judgment. Queen Camilla stared at the door through which her son had retreated, her face a mixture of maternal concern and grudging acknowledgement that his behavior had been indefensible. Princess Anne, having delivered her devastating critique, seemed to deflate slightly as the adrenaline of confrontation faded. But Malcolm noticed that her eyes remained alert, watching the reactions of everyone in the room. She understood that the real work of family healing was just beginning, and that the success or failure of the afternoon would be determined by what happened in the next few minutes. Catherine was the first to break the silence. "I want everyone to know," she said quietly, "that I never wanted this to happen. I've tried very hard not to let Tom's comments affect me, but I suppose they've been building up over time." Prince William immediately moved closer to his wife. "You shouldn't have had to endure any of it," he said firmly. "And you certainly shouldn't have had to suffer in silence, because the rest of us were too concerned with keeping the peace to address the problem." Malcolm watched as King Charles slowly raised his head, his expression showing the weight of his position as both family patriarch and monarch. "Catherine," the king said, "I owe you an apology. I should have intervened much sooner. I should have made it clear that Tom's behavior was unacceptable. I failed in my duty as head of this family." The admission was remarkable in its honesty and humility. Malcolm had rarely heard the king accept responsibility so directly for a family situation, but the afternoon's events had clearly shaken him deeply. Queen Camilla shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Malcolm could see her internal struggle between her role as mother and her position as queen consort. When she finally spoke, her voice was strained but sincere. "Catherine, I am deeply sorry for Tom's behavior. There's no excuse for the way he spoke to you today, or apparently on previous occasions that I wasn't aware of." She paused, clearly struggling with her next words. "I think I've been willfully blind to some of his attitudes. Perhaps because I wanted so much for everyone to get along, I ignored warning signs that should have been obvious. That was unfair to you and to this family." Malcolm recognized the courage it took for the queen consort to acknowledge her own role in enabling her son's inappropriate behavior. The admission created an opening for genuine healing within the family, though he understood that rebuilding trust would take considerable time and effort. Princess Anne, who had been quietly observing these exchanges, finally spoke again. "What happened here today needed to happen," she said with characteristic directness. "We've all been tiptoeing around Tom's sense of entitlement for too long, and it was causing real damage to family relationships." She turned to face Catherine directly. "But I want you to understand something important. What I said today wasn't just about defending you against Tom's attacks, though that was certainly necessary. It was about recognizing the reality of who you are and what you've accomplished. You have earned your place in this family through years of dedicated service. You belong here not because of your marriage to William, but because of who you are as a person and as a royal." Malcolm was struck by the profound impact of Princess Anne's words. She was offering Catherine something that went beyond mere defense against criticism. She was providing official recognition of Catherine's value and contributions to the family. For someone who had faced years of scrutiny and occasional hostility, this endorsement from the family's most respected member was invaluable. Catherine's composure finally cracked completely. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as she processed the emotional impact of finally being fully accepted and defended by her husband's family. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more to me than you can possibly know." Prince William reached over and took his wife's hand, his own eyes moist with emotion. Malcolm could see years of protective tension leaving the prince's shoulders as he realized that Catherine now had a powerful ally in his aunt. The conversation that followed was unlike any family discussion Malcolm had ever observed during royal gatherings. For once, the typical royal reserve was set aside in favor of honest communication about feelings, relationships, and family dynamics. Princess Anne led the conversation with her characteristic directness, but Malcolm noticed a gentleness in her approach that he had rarely seen in formal settings. They talked about the pressures facing all family members, the challenges of balancing public duties with private relationships, and the importance of supporting each other rather than allowing external criticism to create internal divisions. It was clear that Tom's behavior had been symptomatic of larger family communication issues that needed to be addressed. King Charles, perhaps motivated by his sister's example of direct confrontation, began to articulate expectations for family behavior that had previously been left unspoken. "We cannot allow personal jealousies or resentments to undermine family unity," he said with growing confidence. "Everyone who participates in family gatherings must understand that we support each other. We respect each other's contributions, and we address our differences privately rather than through public attacks or passive-aggressive comments." Queen Camilla nodded in agreement, though Malcolm could see that she was still processing the implications for her relationship with her son. "I will speak with Tom," she said quietly. "He needs to understand that his behavior cannot continue if he wants to remain part of family activities." The commitment was significant, representing a choice between enabling her son's inappropriate behavior and maintaining her position within the royal family structure. Malcolm understood that this decision would likely strain her relationship with Tom, but it was necessary for the family's long-term health. As the formal part of the meeting drew to a close, Malcolm observed the subtle but important changes in family dynamics that had emerged from the confrontation. Catherine was no longer an outsider hoping for acceptance. She was now a fully recognized member of the family, with Princess Anne as her explicit champion. Prince William was no longer carrying the burden of defending his wife alone. He now had family support for addressing inappropriate behavior toward Catherine. Most importantly, the family had established clear consequences for behavior that undermined family unity. Tom's effective banishment from family gatherings until he could demonstrate appropriate respect would serve as a warning to anyone else who might be tempted to use family meetings as opportunities for personal attacks. In the weeks and months that followed the confrontation, Malcolm noticed significant changes in the family's behavior and relationships. Tom Parker Bowles was notably absent from subsequent royal gatherings, and when he did occasionally appear at large family events, his behavior was markedly more respectful and subdued. Queen Camilla's relationship with Catherine became warmer and more genuine, freed from the underlying tension created by her son's hostility. Most significantly, Princess Anne and Catherine developed a close working relationship that surprised many royal observers. The Princess Royal began including Catherine in more of her charitable activities, and Catherine started seeking Anne's advice on handling difficult royal situations. Malcolm watched their partnership develop with professional satisfaction, recognizing that it strengthened both women's positions within the family structure. The incident also had broader implications for royal family dynamics. Other family members began to understand that inappropriate behavior would no longer be tolerated in the name of keeping peace. The expectation of mutual respect and support became explicit rather than assumed, creating a healthier environment for all family members. Prince William's gratitude toward his aunt never diminished. Malcolm observed numerous instances where the prince sought Princess Anne's counsel on various matters, clearly viewing her as someone who would always prioritize family welfare over diplomatic convenience. As Malcolm reflected on the afternoon's events during his final months of service before retirement, he recognized that he had witnessed a defining moment in modern royal history. Princess Anne's confrontation with Tom Parker Bowles had done more than simply defend Catherine against unfair attacks. It had redefined family relationships and established new standards for acceptable behavior within the House of Windsor. The incident demonstrated the importance of having family members willing to speak difficult truths and enforce appropriate boundaries, even when doing so created temporary conflict. Princess Anne's willingness to confront Tom's behavior had ultimately strengthened the family by eliminating a source of ongoing tension and establishing clear expectations for future interactions. Years later, when Malcolm would occasionally share carefully edited versions of this story with trusted friends, he would always emphasize the same point. Real family loyalty sometimes requires the courage to have difficult conversations and establish firm boundaries. Princess Anne's defense of Catherine wasn't just about protecting one family member from another's inappropriate behavior. It was about defining what the royal family stood for and what standards they would uphold. The Green Drawing Room returned to hosting routine family discussions and schedule coordination meetings, but the atmosphere was permanently changed. There was a new understanding that family gatherings were safe spaces where mutual respect was expected and enforced. Catherine never again had to endure inappropriate comments about her worthiness to be part of the family, and other family members understood that such behavior would have immediate and serious consequences. In Malcolm's final assessment, the confrontation had revealed the best qualities of several family members while exposing the worst in one individual. Princess Anne's courage, Catherine's grace under pressure, and the family's ultimate willingness to address difficult truths had created a stronger, more unified House of Windsor. The incident would remain one of the most dramatic and consequential family moments in modern royal history, demonstrating that sometimes the most loving thing family members can do is hold each other accountable for their actions and their treatment of others.